Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into something truly groundbreaking. We're going to explore some brand new data that actually attempts to diagnose systemic governance failure. We spend so much time talking about politics, policies, and elections, but we rarely look beneath the surface at the mechanics of the system itself. Well, today, we're looking at research from a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit called CARO, which stands for Care for Assets, Resources, and Obligations. They've made this absolutely fascinating attempt to empirically measure how fair a governing system is right down at the structural level. Okay, let's dive into this, because this fundamental question totally challenges the conventional wisdom of almost every political debate you have ever heard. Seriously, think about it. When our governments fail to deliver, when corruption runs rampant, or when public services just collapse, our immediate instinct is to blame the politicians, right? We vote them out, we vote new people in, and we expect things to magically change. But what if the people aren't actually the root of the problem? What if the system itself is structurally designed in a way that literally guarantees failure no matter who is sitting in the leadership chair? I love this quote because it perfectly captures CARO's core philosophy. They point out that governance reform almost always targets individuals. It's always about rooting out corrupt leaders, or educating uninformed voters, or propping up weak institutions. But CARO argues that none of that works long-term because the architectural design of the democracy itself is flawed. It's like trying to fix a crumbling house by just painting the walls. Their approach targets the structural design of a democracy rather than just the individuals running it. They aren't just trying to swap out the people. They're trying to fundamentally redesign the system. So to grasp how they actually do this, here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The governance problem. 2. Defining structural fairness. 3. The Fairness Index V1. 4. Breaking down the data. And 5. Redesigning the system. It's a very logical, empirical journey from the problem right through to the solution. Let's get into it. Starting with part 1, the governance problem, and specifically 4 failed elections. Let's set up the real-world context that inspired this entire study in the first place. So this timeline traces the personal experience of A.N.M. Nuruddin, who is Arya Klo's chief architect and founder. Growing up in Bangladesh, he finally became eligible to vote in 2006. But get this, that year, an election was scheduled and then just never held. Now, in 2008, he and his fellow citizens did get to vote with genuine hope, but over the next decade, the democratic architecture completely collapsed. By 2014, 153 out of the 300 parliamentary seats were entirely uncontested. And by 2018, there were widespread reports of votes being recorded before citizens had even gone to the polls. Watching this system disintegrate over 12 years crystallized a massive realization for him. The problem isn't just local corruption. It's deeply, undeniably structural. And the scary part? Every democracy faces these exact same architectural vulnerabilities. Moving on to part 2, defining structural fairness and the equitism framework. This is where we move from identifying the problem to looking at the theory designed to fix it. To tackle structural failure, CARO developed a philosophy called equiticism. The core idea here is pretty simple, but really powerful. Fairness cannot just be an empty campaign promise. It has to be structural. Under equiticism, representation absolutely must be ensured. That means citizens need a structural, concrete voice in decisions, not just a symbolic one. Plus, responsibility has to actually count. Authority without proportionate accountability is considered structurally illegitimate. So, in short, equiticism demands that fairness isn't just aspirational. It is built directly into the DNA of public institutions and strictly enforced. All right, part 3, the Fairness Index V1, measuring the immeasurable. Now, how exactly do you enforce a philosophy? Well, first you have to be able to measure it. Getting hard data on systemic fairness is incredibly difficult, but CARO built a very specific diagnostic tool to do exactly that. Here are the parameters of their pilot study. It was conducted in April 2026, gathering 86 verified responses to establish a localized baseline for Bangladesh. The survey asked participants to evaluate 5 specific governance domains using a strict scale, where 1 is completely unfair and 5 is completely fair. This is literally the world's first empirical measurement of structural governance fairness. Which brings us to part 4, breaking down the data, and of course, the big reveal. Now, what's really interesting about this next slide is seeing how all that methodology actually played out in the macro score. 1.74 out of 5.0. Wow. This is the overall Fairness Index, or OFI score, for the Bangladesh baseline. Remember, a 1 means completely unfair. A 3 would be neutral, and a 5 is completely fair. So a score of 1.74 is dramatically, shockingly low. This number represents a highly measurable and deeply felt perception of systemic structural unfairness among the citizens evaluating the system. It is numerical proof of a massive structural deficit. But it's when you drill down into the specific domains that you notice something really striking. These are the 3 highest performing domains out of the 5 they measured: economy and resources at 1.88, accountability and institutions at 1.85, and justice and rule of law at 1.81. Even the absolute highest performing sectors in this democracy completely failed to reach a 2.0 on a 5-point scale. Across the board, participants are perceiving a severe lack of structural fairness. And this brilliantly illustrates how concerning it gets at the absolute bottom of the data set. While governance and leadership score is a 1.70, public services and welfare plummets all the way down to a 1.44. This gives us a really concrete look at where the system is failing citizens the most. Abstract political failure is hitting people right where it hurts the most: their day-to-day welfare and survival. The system is buckling under the weight of poor structural design. So the crucial point is, what do we actually do with all this heavily negative data? That brings us to part 5, redesigning the system, from data to action, because CARO actually has a plan to remedy this. CARO has designed this continuous, actionable, structural redesign loop. Step 1, as we've just seen, is to measure the baseline using the Fairness Index. Step 2 takes that empirical data and uses it to train a whole new generation of leaders through a highly interactive simulation called Player 1, literally throwing them into real policy dilemmas. And then Step 3 takes the learnings from that training to build a massive, enforceable global policy blueprint called the Universal Governance Framework. So the data directly informs the training, and the training directly informs the policy. Now, to ground all this abstract data in reality, CARO is already running massive, volunteer-led civic engagement programs nationwide to train these system-ready leaders. They aren't just writing academic papers. They've reached over 2,250 verified unique individuals. They're active in 211 out of 300 parliamentary constituencies, maintaining a presence in all 8 national divisions of Bangladesh. Plus, they're actively training leaders right now, selecting over 130 young people for their immersive volunteer empowerment program. And honestly, the most fascinating update here is that this data collection isn't static. The Fairness Index V1 we just looked at, that was just the pilot. Right now, CARO's Player 1 digital simulation is collecting live Fairness Index data. As participants play the simulation and navigate real-world governance dilemmas, they are constantly generating live, evolving data on how fair and equitable their decisions actually are. It's like a live updating monitor of structural integrity. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. We just looked at the baseline for Bangladesh, right? But the equitism framework argues that every democracy faces these exact same architectural challenges. So ask yourself, if your country's governing system, its public services, and its justice system were empirically measured by citizens today, what would its Fairness Index score be? Would it break a 2.0? It's definitely a question that makes you look at the daily news a whole lot differently. If you're as intrigued by this as I am, I highly recommend looking deeper into CARO's Universal Governance Framework. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and keep asking the big questions.